Okay, so welcome back, Senator Kim. It is so great to have you here.
Oh, it's so great to be with you. Thank you so much for all the incredible work you, your crew, and all your listeners do.
Well, thank you so much.
Listeners are viewers. I guess it's viewers too.
We kind of think of them as our communities. We don't really call them our audience or our listeners or anything. We're always like, so what do you think our community wants? And that's how we.
Thank you. You keep teaching me.
No problem. It's just like, then they're part of what we're doing instead of like outside the process.
Exactly. No, I like that. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about universal basic income. First of all, what is it?
Okay. So universal basic income often is referred to as and part of the reason some folks who are what would often be described as more left-leaning haven't been supportive historically, why some women's groups, some other groups that generally experience greater vulnerability, marginalization, discrimination have not been in favor is originally it was conceived of as a universal basic income that basically acted like a demogrant. Every single person, just by being, say, in Canada, would get it. What many of us have embraced, however, in fact, I don't know. There may be some folks who still are saying UBI. The term often still gets used, but what most of us are talking about is a guaranteed livable income. And many of us, it became really much more something that people were more interested in during the pandemic, because when Canada implemented the CERB, the Emergency Response Benefit, it was available to anybody who had been working. It wasn't universally available. Sorry, when I think of the universality, I think of it in the way we think of what our healthcare system is supposed to be: universally accessible when you need it, to everybody, not just to some. And so, we need to shore up that system, as we've seen during this pandemic as well. And we many of us saw well before that. And when we were talking about defund the police, we know in terms of mental health issues, that's a huge, huge discrepancy in what's available to folks. But when I talk about it, and in fact, my whole reason for coming to the Senate really was that all the work I'd been doing showed me that it was predominantly, you could have social programs, you could have social assistance, but in every province and territory in this country, you cannot live on social assistance. To be on social assistance is to be infinitely criminalizable, to be infinitely or constantly on the brink of homelessness and starvation. And so we know that nobody who is currently on social assistance anywhere in this country can survive. So that's wrong. And so clearly the government thinks it's wrong too, because the benefit they brought in was a minimum of $24,000 a year. There was nowhere in this country even disability benefits would be that high. And so, that's not high in my view. But I think we should look at that as fundamentally a benchmark, that if that's what the government felt everybody should be entitled to, that plus cost of living adjustments based on where you live, what the housing costs, all of those are really important. And so I don't think anybody who's promoting a guaranteed livable base or basic income is promoting that alone and get rid of social programs. But that's often the scaremongering that goes along with it, or the fear mongering, which is that people are promoting that and forget housing, forget social services, forget childcare, forget eye care, dental care, mental health care. Nobody that I know who is credible on these issues is talking about that. Instead, they're talking about, yes, have all of those social supports, but fundamentally what people need who are living in poverty, or experience economic deprivation, is money. And $5 or $10 a day childcare is just as inaccessible if you don't have money as it is if you don't have it at all for other groups. And so I think, for many of us, that's what, we're talking about. If you're interested, and if there's a way to provide links for the community who's interested, your community, our communities who are interested in this, I can send you what we call our perspectives document. It was put together, and not surprising to you, by young people who worked in our office last year. Because we launched an inquiry, and in the Senate, that means one of the things you can do as a senator is say, I'm interested in this issue. We launch an inquiry, we say, I'm interested in this issue. Anybody else interested? And so I can also send you the speech I gave, just coincidentally, 3 weeks before the pandemic started. I'd launched that inquiry saying, I'm really interested in this. This is actually what I came to the Senate to do. Interesting, though, parenthetically, the peer pressure of when I first said that, when I came to the Senate, people said, all around me said, maybe don't lead with that as the issue you came here for, because people will think you're a bit way out there. Now, virtually everybody's talking about it. And so I do think this election is the time to ask every single candidate who comes to your door. There's all kinds of questions, but one of them is, what is their position on a guaranteed livable income? Not an income that goes to the wealthiest people, but CERB was put in place during this pandemic, but more than 3.5 to 5 million people, depending on which poverty line you use, went without any kind of economic supports. And we know right now, most of the eviction notices have gone, for the past year, people have been experiencing even greater homelessness and more abject poverty than before the pandemic. We know that it's the workers that we have relied on, some of whom have been made homeless during this time, who are living in shelters, even though they're working full-time at minimum wage jobs. There are a lot of people who could benefit from that. And not just that, but we know from the child benefit and the guaranteed income supplement for seniors that for every dollar that is provided through those types of benefits, through like a guaranteed livable income, which the CERB is a sort of version of, the child benefit is a version of, and the guaranteed income supplement for seniors is a version of, that for every dollar that is provided, it actually stimulates $2 within the economy. Now, I'm not an economist, so I trust that those figures that are coming from places like the Parliamentary Budget Office and others are reliable. But what I do know is that if you give people money in your community, you contribute money in the community. Money's already going. We spend tens and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to manage poverty instead of trying to address it in this country. And if that money instead went into people's hands, guess what? They spend it in the community. They buy food, they buy clothing, they buy, they rent places, they try to live. And so we should be encouraging an approach that is not judgmental like our current and inadequate like our current social assistance schemes, which are designed to keep people entrenched in abject poverty and moralize about them and blame them for their own situation. So I think every candidate should be asked, what is their position? How do they plan to address poverty? What are their social supports and economic supports and health supports are they committed to putting in place? Because we need to get that on the record and also hold, once the election is over, hold to account whoever is our government.
Oh my gosh, I agree with everything. Like if there was a retweet button for what you just said, I would click it.
Here.
Side question. It's interesting that they were like, that's too out there when you brought that up. What do you know, like the median income pre-Senate for senators? Like, is there a number there? Because I feel like it's like about rich. Like, I feel like they're just wealthy people who end up on the Senate.
That's a very good question. Actually, just a little anecdote here. Sorry, and you can cut this if you could. But when I first started in the Senate, one of my new colleagues said, "How are you managing on the salary?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "This is more than 3 times I made in nonprofit." Now, I had red circled my salary so I could hire people coming out of prison and make sure they had a decent salary and some benefits. But that was, I'm very clear, that was my choice. I could have been making a lot more as a lawyer or doing other things. But the fact that for many people who come to the Senate, it's a cut in pay is shocking to me. We make, now if I've got the number wrong, I'll find it so you can put the exact number, but I think it's $157,000. Now, I pay out of my pocket to do social media because most of the people I've met, I know through ways that are considered conflictual. Of course, I have a budget and I hire people as well, but they're, through the Senate budget. But the fact that that is considered a cut in pay, and a huge cut in pay for some people, was like, blew my mind. And, so it just shows how stupid or how naive, I guess I was. And I'm not a particularly naive person, but it's a huge salary. And yeah, most people come with, from making a lot of money.
Right. So obviously, for like, not to be frustrated, but I am, of course, that group of people would feel like UBI is too far out there, or not UBI, guaranteed livable income, because that's not a lived experience or lived reality for those people. Even if any of them had personally experienced poverty at some point in their life, the circumstances that they were experiencing is probably super different from anything going on today, right now. That makes me want to scream in to my pillow, because I think that I don't want to get too far away from the guaranteed livable income, but decisions like that need to be made with the community, because that's where expertise come from. And then in the same way that we were saying that in an earlier episode, that the RCMP needs to have, change in how they recruit people, a change systemically, and maybe a finding out defunding to put into different areas that are more relevant. I would at least say the first two of these are applicable to the Senate and all government bodies as well, because it shouldn't be just people who are wealthy making the laws. I mean, I know that's how our parliamentary system originally existed, but we should be changing that at this point.
Absolutely. And there's a number of us who feel the fact that you have to own $4,000 worth of property precludes a whole lot of people from, now there's an application process, but if you don't fit that, now $4,000 in 1867 was, imagine the wealth of who could be in the Senate. No wonder there were no women and no racialized people. The first Indigenous senator who couldn't even vote, and anyway, I could rant on ad nauseum about that. I mean, I have some great colleagues, but many come from incredibly privileged positions, and I agree. And when at one point I raised the fact that if you're on social assistance and you borrow money, it's counted as income, people were incredulous. They had no idea. Part of it is ignorance, that if you've never experienced it, how do you know it? And when I said, basically the amount of money you get for food every day is less than most people pay for a cup of coffee. One cup of coffee, if they buy it in a day, I think it's almost like they just close their ears to it because they can't believe it. And the number one myth about guaranteed livable income and why people don't support it, and we've heard it with the CERB, is it'll make people lazy and people won't work. There is no evidence of that. In fact, all of the studies, all of the pilots that have been done show just the opposite. The only people who stay home more when they have the opportunity for a guaranteed livable income are two groups: people who want to take care of their children, elderly, people with disabilities, or who want to go to school or get training to be able to get a job or a better job. Now, isn't that what we want? Those are the very people we want to be able to stay home. And why wouldn't we support that? But there's such a judgment and such a view that people are poor because they choose to be. Nobody makes the same judgment of individuals who get, inheritances and live off stipends from parents. I'm sorry, who's lazy? Who's lazy and choosing not to work? Well, it's certainly not people who are poor. And actually, sorry, and one other little rant. during this process, one of the young Indigenous women who was working as an intern with us last year introduced me to is in Manitoba, there are a group of Indigenous women who have done research about how much it costs to be poor. And they have to work 10 to 12-hour days to find enough food, to figure out the systems, to negotiate poverty, to actually get by. These aren't people who aren't doing anything, quite the opposite. They're working incredibly hard to just try and make ends meet and figure out how to, how to do things. And if I hear one more time that all we need for poor people is good budgeting skills, like, honestly, anyway, I would say some not appropriate things for
you can say
the community.
We'll take.
Well, you can imagine a whole bunch of expletives. I just won't say them.
I think another. I love that you brought up like this, the stereotype we've been fed and that we sometimes like just accept or have accepted around the type of people that access it and being lazy, or they, I've heard they'll spend it on drugs and they'll spend it on this. And it's just, you're not that person. So you can't tell us what they're going to spend it on. Like, you just can't.
Exactly. I remember taking my son on a march years ago when social assistance rates were being cut, and one of the ministers, I think it was in Ontario, who was responsible, said, we're cutting social assistance because all they do is buy cake and drink beer. And he made a sign that says, I don't like cake and I can't drink beer. He was like 4 or 5 at the time. But the point was that, like, do we judge anybody else? Like, let's go to the liquor store and just see how many people who, got served or got to work at home are buying booze. Booze prices or booze sales apparently have gone through the roof during this time. What kind of judgment has that been about people? No, it's only people who are living in poverty or who are struggling, who are chastised about their choices, or who we feel we have the moral authority to question what they spend their money on. Like, anyway, so yes, sorry. My exasperation. When I first, I started to interrupt you again earlier, and I apologize, because when I first came to the Senate, someone who I knew who worked in the Senate said that they had already the decision about unparliamentary language, because they were sure I would drop a few F-bombs within the first little while. And believe me, sometimes I've said it under my breath, but I've been trying hard to not use the language that I often would pepper my frustration with, my expressions of frustration with.
My parents are also really against like swear words. And I feel like that, like, those words are not as bad as like systemic racism and other things that I have to deal with on a regular basis. So like, I drop F-bombs all the time and I sometimes feel bad for it, but normally I'm just like I think for my parents, like, that was like the worst thing you could say. And I'm like, no, being systemically oppressed is much worse. I cannot do this. So seeing that a colonial structure like the Senate is like, please don't swear, but it's okay that we're systemically racist. But okay, side question, but then I want to get back to what people can ask their elected officials when they come. So you have to own property in order to be on Senate, or to be or is it just Senate, or is it an elected official as well?
No, just the Senate. Okay,
so that's trash, right? Like, millennials can't own any. We have the economy sucks. I'm not going to buy a house. I'm going to live with my parents until I get married, and then hopefully, I don't know, like.
No, it's completely inappropriate. And if you're Indigenous and living on reserve, you can never own property on, in your community, because it's always co-owned with the band. And so, it's hugely discriminatory. And some people have said, well, it's only $4,000. Well, I'm sorry, but much of my life scraping together $4,000 would have been a huge effort. And so, it's hugely, and there are many, many of us who are trying to figure out how to change it. Part of the challenge is a constitutional change is
this
anyway.
Is that drives me nuts is that, like, if you know something doesn't make sense, it shouldn't take a long time to undo it. And I hate that we just accept that our systems take a long time to like common sense policies. Like, it just doesn't. Screaming inside.
Yeah. No, and in fact, I don't care if it's public. A number of us have talked about encouraging people to apply and providing support to actually buy the property they need to have so that they can apply.
That's amazing. I think more people should. I tell people all the time to apply for Senate. But I feel like the people that I'm telling to apply are all like young.
You have to be over 30 too.
I'm 30. There
you go.
So like my friends are that age range. So I tell people all the time and they're just like, yeah, they're not going to pick me because I'm outspoken or I don't have the track record or like all the qualifications that, I don't know, I guess you have to be on Senate. I don't know. I've found a way to disrupt things from the outside, so I'm happy. But okay, now let's pivot back to what can I say to someone when they knock on my door asking for my vote around guaranteed livable income? What would you recommend that we ask? And also, how do we make sure that what they're saying is not just like
platitudes?
Yeah.
So I would ask the question, what is your position on guaranteed livable income? And what is your party's position? And why is it not in the platform? Because no party, the Green Party has it in, I should correct myself, and the NDP apparently has been saying, for seniors, for people with disabilities, they'd support a guaranteed livable or basic income, but nobody else has it in their platform. And so I think those questions should be being asked. And if it's not in your platform, what are you doing about it? Mm-hmm. Because, and if they say, oh, the evidence isn't clear, ask them where they get that information. Because, and the material I'll send you out is, we've also done an annotated bibliography, so I'll remember to send that to you too. And so there is no evidence that people stay home more, people don't work, but there is evidence that we see reductions in crime rates, reductions in healthcare costs, because people who have the resources to, eat well, to have some food security, also then don't get some of the health issues that cause them to end up in emergency with the types of preventable diseases that supports and health, early intervention, good food can prevent, like diabetes, like heart conditions. And so if they start to spout some of those myths and stereotypes, then ask them where they got that evidence and, what the basis for that thought is, because they won't be able to back it up. I can guarantee you it's all based on myth and stereotype. And so I would welcome people using any of the material we have in whatever way that makes sense to debunk that, because we need to move forward. And young people in particular need to have opportunities to go to school. I mean, you probably also know I support free post-secondary education and vocational training.
Yeah.
Really, why is it that someone who comes from the type of background I come from couldn't do the type of work I did that then got me in the Senate, right? So I worked for nonprofits, and I was able to go to university, and four degree paths later, still working for nonprofit, and then get to be in this position. Well, I know that most working class kids now couldn't do that because you couldn't afford the mountain of debt. I had a big debt when I finished, but nothing compared to what you guys, leaving
medians, but then also what we're charging international students who often come to stay here is also just like when people invest in the future. We are the future. Invest in us. Like, where do you think we're spending this money that we're going to make from these careers? Right back into the community, right back into our world. So I don't know.
And we want young people who have the lived, as we've already talked about, we want young people who have the lived experience so that when they're in positions of power, they're not recreating and reinforcing the privileges, the white supremacy, the discriminatory attitudes. We want young people to be able to get the education. We want young people to be well fed. We want young people to have the appropriate health, mental health, dental, eye care, and pharmacare that they need, as well as if they've got kids, child care, if they're worried about their parents, elder care, if they have people or themselves have other challenges in terms of disabilities, then those can be taken care of.
What do you sort of say to people who say that, like, but the economy, like it's not good for the economy to like give people these things? Because I feel like that's the big argument I always hear, and I'm always just like, I can't.
Well, my response is the same. Show me the proof of that. The evidence is the child benefit and the GIS, guaranteed income supplement for seniors. Every dollar that we give, that we provide in that manner, generates $2 of economic, what do you call it? Economic stimulate. Thank you. Yes, economic stimulation. And we also know that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, oh, if we don't provide guaranteed livable income, there's no issue. We are spending, think of what we're spending on prisons, on social assistance, on policing people, like all of the approaches that we take that are about blaming and shaming people who do not have the same economic privilege as those making the decisions, costs a lot of money. And if we invested instead in people, in community, then we know from places like Iceland, from Scandinavian countries, particularly Finland, who they took all the money they got from oil and invested it in community. And, that one, there's a better overall health of the population, lower crime rates. And guess what? They even do happiness indexes now. Can imagine. And so people are happier. And who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want lower crime rates, healthier people, people being, now they're talking about things like 3 and 4 day work weeks because they realize it's way better for people. They're talking, they had forest schools, so they didn't have to close down all their, schools because they had taken a much different approach to human well-being. And many of the women leaders, it's interesting, on some of the conversations that I was really, really privileged during this time to be sometimes just a fly on the wall, it was the young women leaders, particularly young racialized women leaders internationally, who were talking about, we don't want to just measure the recovery out of this pandemic by GDP. We want to look at human well-being as the measure. So how are people doing in terms of health? How are they doing in terms of economic opportunities? And how are they doing in terms of overall well-being? That's what we should be doing. And that's what we should be asking every candidate, what their position is and how they're going to make that happen for everybody in this country, not just them.
I completely agree. I feel like this pandemic brought so much that many of us were shouting in our own spaces for a really long time, but they made it, the pandemic, as awful as it was, also gave us this like collective understanding that now that we know all that we know, we have to demand better, and we have to push our systems to be better and not like be rigid and not fluid and not able to evolve, because then what is the point? I don't want the same system that existed back when women couldn't vote, or back when people of color weren't allowed to do the same things as white people. Like we should be pushing forward and not incrementally, like exponentially further. We've learned too much. We know too much. Let's make changes. And that's the leadership I want to see for Canada. And that's what we're going to keep pushing for on the project. So let's wrap up here, but thank you so much for connecting with me. And I'm looking forward to keep these chats going, because you're like our whole community is obsessed with you. So